Mr. Kumar Mangalam Birlaji. A renowned industrialist, Mr. Birla is chairman of the Aditya Birla Group, one of the largest Indian conglomerate operating in 36 countries across 6 continents. Aditya Birla Group today enjoys a position of leadership in all the major sectors in which it operates, from cement to chemicals, metals to textiles, and fashion to financial services. Mr. Birla is deeply engaged with educational institutions, including the Birla Institute of Technology and Science, with campuses in Pilani, Goa, Hyderabad, and Dubai. He has held several key positions on various regulatory and professional boards. Over the years, Mr. Birla has won recognition for his exemplary contribution to corporate leadership and to building institutions and systems. Sir, it is a privilege to have you address the August gathering from the platform of Indian Chamber of Commerce, a platform set up by a group of pioneering industrialists led by your great-grandfather, the Venerable G.D. Birlaji. Sir, it is a great honor to have you with us on this important occasion of Indian Chamber of Commerce. And ladies and gentlemen, before we listen to Mr. Birla, may I request Sri Sanjeev Goenka, Chairman RPG Sanjeev Goenka Group and ICC Advisory Council Chair, to kindly share his special remarks with us. Sanjeev Bhaiya, over to you.
Thank you, Vikash, and good afternoon, everyone. It's my privilege to introduce Kumar, an outstanding industrialist, a great human being, a superb family man, and a very responsible citizen. He's built a legacy which is based on vision, on efficiency, on competitiveness, on technology, and on quick and efficient implementation. A legacy which is very difficult for anyone else to match. He was one of the first family-owned businesses to introduce the culture of a completely professionally managed setup. And he has combined professional management with strong accountability extremely well, so much so that it has now become the model for most family-owned businesses. He's a quiet listener, and that's the hallmark of a leader. He's self-assured, and that comes with repeated success and correct decision-making. He's humble, he's warm, he's compassionate. He's a man who commands respect, and that respect comes not just from the legacy, but from his achievements, which are humongous. He's a man who's very focused. Ladies and gentlemen, I have great pleasure and privilege in presenting to you an outstanding leader, an outstanding professional, and frankly, an inspiration, Mr. Kumar Mangalam Birla.
Thank you, Sanjeev. I think that's very generous, very kind of you to say those words. Vikash, office bearers, members of the ICC, good afternoon to all of you. I thank you for inviting me to your annual session. Let me start by congratulating the ICC for having completed 96 years, and I wish you even greater success in the years to come. As perhaps all of you know, my family's association with the ICC harks back to its formative years with my great-grandfather, Shri Aditya Birla, Shri G.D. Birla, serving as president in the founding years. We're in the midst of celebrating 75 years of independence from colonial rule. It is being celebrated as Azadi Ka Amrit Mahotsav across the length and breadth of the country. I think this celebration is a historic occasion, not just for India, but for the whole world. We are the world's largest democracy and possibly also the most diverse. in every conceivable dimension. We represent 1/7 of humanity, and we are celebrating not just our survival as a united modern nation state, but also our progress and very impressive development on all fronts. When you climb a mountain, the grind feels slow, and hence you may not realize the height that you have reached unless you pause and look back. You will be astonished at how much we have achieved as a nation, considering our distant, very humble beginning. This 70 years celebration to me is a look back and also an occasion to look ahead. In a couple of generations, it would seem like we have leapfrogged centuries, and yet there is a great sense of continuity with an ancient civilization that is India. India is, of course, a young nation state. We are also a fast growing economy. It is a very diverse society. We can examine ourselves through these different lenses as nation, state, economy, or society, and each will convey a very fascinating picture. For instance, as far as the economy is concerned, in just the past 3 decades alone, we have seen our economic size grow 10 times and per capita income grow by more than 20 times. According to a UN report, India lifted 270 million people out of poverty in just 1 decade. More recently, in just 8 months, as we know, we were able to deliver a staggering billion plus doses of the indigenously manufactured COVID vaccine. And yet it feels like we have barely begun in our journey to keep our tryst with destiny. Today, I thought I would share with you some thoughts on how I see India's journey in the coming decades. This is not merely crystal ball gazing, nor is it just wishful thinking. I see all around very visible markers of the journey which is unfolding right in front of our eyes. And I want to elucidate 5 broad markers or rather themes of India's onward march. First and foremost, I believe that 2021 is the new 1991. This year, as we know, marks 30 years since the landmark economic reforms of 1991. Those reforms were partially triggered by a foreign exchange crisis, which meant that gold had to be pledged to get emergency foreign loan assistance. And then the dramatic unshackling of the economy led to an investment boom, creating a high growth trajectory. As a result, India today is a $3 trillion economy and has the fourth highest stock of foreign exchange in the world, a very far cry from the crisis of 1991. Similarly, I think 2021 will also be remembered as a watershed year, just as 1991 is. Be it consolidation of labor laws into a modern labor code or the conviction in fixing legacy issues plaguing sectors like power and telecom, there is a palpable boldness in the government's recent reform initiatives. 2021 is also the year when long-term reforms like GST and the insolvency code came into their own and have started delivering strong outcomes. In some ways, the Indian economy is, I believe, undergoing a set of economic reforms currently whose effect could be as profound as the effect that the 1991 reforms had on the following decades. And so to me, 2021 is the new 1991. Secondly, I believe that we have upon us a forthcoming decade of, let me call it, CapEx Mahotsav. I believe that the coming decade will see an upsurge in capital expenditure across many sectors. CapEx or investment spending, as we know, fuels and sustains future growth. On one hand, we have public spending, such as the National Infrastructure Pipeline, whose size at $1.5 trillion is even larger than what is being undertaken in the US as part of their infrastructure stimulus. This infra plan of India covers all areas like roads, ports, airports, waterways, electricity, and telecom. Just imagine the impact of an execution pipeline of nearly $300 billion every year and what it could do to stimulate economic activity. The NIP is being enabled and facilitated by a very far-sighted initiative called Gati Shakti, where 16 ministries come together to act in a coordinated way. You might say like a symphony of an orchestra. The government has also been unlocking infra assets, as we know, through its asset monetization program, which in its initial years will release 6 to 7 trillion rupee funds. Beyond infra push is the fact that both banks and corporates' balance sheets are now in healthy shape today. The twin balance sheet problem, with stress caused by excessive bad loans and over-leveraged corporates, is truly a thing of the past. As capacity utilization has gone up, this is the time that we will see a private sector-led capex revival, which I believe will persist for several years. Added to this is the geopolitical factor of China plus one. Many global investors, as I know them, are looking to diversify away from China, and India is an immensely attractive destination for their investments. The third important dimension is the Indian economy's rapid transition from informal to formal. India's economy has had a very large informal sector, which consists of unregistered firms, workers who lack social security, activity which is not fully in the tax nectar. Despite the tag of informal, it is a substantial contributor to the output and employment for India. The disadvantage, though, of too high a proportion of the informal sector is that it fails to get formal funding and capital, which thwarts its growth. Workers don't get social security, contract enforcement is difficult, and the economy is deprived of precious tax resources. Due to the rollout of GST and instant electronic authentication by Aadhaar, the extent of informality, as we know, is shrinking. In fact, thanks to the Jan Dhan Yojana, wherein 350 million no-frills accounts were opened in record time, it has been possible for the government to use direct benefit transfer. This was crucially helpful during the pandemic and continues to be relevant to all social security schemes. The transition from informal to formal can be captured by various metrics. The data from digital transactions and rise in registration of firms and workers in pension schemes is showing that the share of the informal economy may have shrunk considerably in the past couple of years. What the informal to formal transition does is that it helps mainstreaming economic activity. On to the fourth dimension, the key growth drivers of the future, and I call them Silicon and Sunshine. Two recent trends that we can call mega trends in India. One is the deepening of the digital economy. The lockdown induced by the pandemic might have pushed all of us in accelerating the pace of digital adoption even more than before. Whether it is payment systems, exponential growth around e-commerce and platforms, cloud-based services, or everything from taxes and payroll to inventory and enterprise management, the digital economy is just chugging ahead. India currently consumes over 12 gigabytes of data per SIM per month. That is higher than most peer and advanced economies, including Korea, China, Japan, UK, and Australia. Every sector, in fact, is being disrupted by digital innovations. The fiber optic backbone is getting stronger, and so is the architecture on which resides the digital economy. Digital India envisions perhaps more than 40% of the economy becoming digital. The second recent mega trend is, of course, the transition to an increasingly green economy. That's the sunshine part of it. India's progress in installing renewable energy capacity has astonished the world. We have delivered on some of our Paris commitments ahead of time, In his Independence Day speech this year, the Prime Minister announced 5 major initiatives, of which the first one is hydrogen. It is the cleanest fuel imaginable because when you burn it, you get water vapor. Just as we saw a rapid fall in the capital cost of solar energy equipment, the cost of making green hydrogen will surely sharply fall in the coming years. Even the European Commission has put its might behind hydrogen. India is blessed with nearly 350 days of sunshine every year. Solar energy has already achieved cost parity with coal and fossil fuels. Ordinary applications like solar pumps in agriculture are already transforming the lives of farmers. A combination of solar and hydrogen has the promise of making India energy independent, or even perhaps an energy exporter. Thus, both digital economy based on silicon chips and a greening economy based on solar and hydrogen promise to provide tremendous, powerful growth drivers to the economy. And finally, the flowering of entrepreneurial talent in India is a very strong growth multiplier. India has always been a factory of entrepreneurial talent. As one example, I can relate to you the story of an entrepreneurial venture that started only 10 days after independence with the purpose of making India self-reliant, what we call Atmanirbhar today. That small venture, fueled by entrepreneurial energy, grew dynamically and in the past 2 decades alone has reported a turnover of $100 billion and supports a workforce of nearly 25,000 people with a manufacturing presence across 3 continents. I'm referring to the Aditya Birla Group's flagship company, Grasim, which is also celebrating its own Amrit Mahotsav this year. Grasim is a stunning but not an isolated story of a rising and aspirational India. This year, we have already seen the birth of 35 unicorns. Many are first generation entrepreneurs whose raw energy fired by the imagination has created immense value. India has received record inflows of FDI in the form of private equity, which is fueling the growth of these unicorns. Indian entrepreneurs are building businesses at scale, leveraging the power of technology. In the process, they are addressing a billion Indian consumers. Their success will easily be exported to the whole globe. This guts and gumption attitude is also evident in other fields like sports, where the homegrown Indian Premier League is now one of the biggest sporting extravaganzas anywhere in the world. India's inherent entrepreneurial talent combined with its youthful democracy is a potent mix. In fact, today's youths do not have the scarcity mindset of the pre-reform years and are actually born with the exponential mindset. In modern India, the ever widening set of opportunities is becoming accessible to more and more people. Entry barriers are being demolished all around. Let me use another cricketing example to illustrate the democratization of opportunity. The world-beating Indian cricket team's membership is no longer the domain exclusively of a few clubs and maidans from the metro cities of India. A ticket collector or a rickshaw puller's child from small town India could quite easily also dazzle on the global cricketing stage. We have seen this story repeated amongst our global Olympic winners as well. The audacity of hope, as I call it, and the quest for progress by a large and youthful population is a very powerful and transformative force. A decade from now, India will still be a young nation with a median age of only 31 and a billion plus internet users. In these 10 years, India will add about 200 million high and middle income households. This will act like a force multiplier for the economic momentum. The force of reforms, the force of investment, the force of formalization, the force of digital and green technology, and the force of youth and entrepreneurship. I'm convinced that these 5 forces will propel India's rise over the next several decades. India's position as an economic superpower is its inevitable destiny. Can we crystallize our ambition in some tangible ways? Here are a few markers. For instance, in value creation, can we now move beyond unicorns to decacons? How about aiming for 200 Indian companies with a market cap greater than $10 billion? Can we target a 100-fold increase in worldwide patent applications to create great intellectual wealth? Can we spawn a dozen new Nobel Prize winners from India? Can we attract 100 million inbound tourists every year? Can we transform yoga into a $100 billion industry? Can we win at least 5 Olympic gold medals in the individual category for a country of our size and scale? As President Obama very famously said, yes, we can. History, geopolitics, and demography are all, I believe, on our side. Even the stars have aligned to favor us. And this destiny is now for us as Indians to grab. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. It was indeed a pleasure to listen to you. And I'm sure with the given opportunity, we now have a lot to think, plan, and act as industrialists and businessmen in order to bring the Indian economy at par with the very best economies of the world. So with your permission, if I may now ask a question here. So you spoke so much about the Indian economy. Do you think our government reforms will accelerate India's growth trajectory? Or like 1 or 2 reforms you think government should focus on?
So, like I said in my remarks, I think that the government seems to be doing all the right things. I think the big driver of growth would be their investment in infrastructure through the NIP. The ripple impact of that would be huge. Their spending, like I said, is actually more than the infrastructure spending that the US has planned for itself. So I would think that infrastructure spending is the one pivot that can change the pace and the scale of economic growth in our country to a very large extent. The other, I think, is the young population of the country. And the government seems to be creating a more nurturing environment, let's say, for startups. And I think that youthful energy and the drive to achieve and create something new is a very powerful and important force in creating a new India.
Thank you for saying. I have one more question here. What would be your advice for family businesses, especially the younger generation?
Well, I think that it's very important to be passionate about what you're doing. Without that, you really can't enjoy what you're doing and can't really do your best. And I think persistency is very important from my experience. If you just can't give up, you've got to hang in there.
Absolutely. We take that. And now with your permission, we'll open the interactive session with members.
Sure.
May I request Ameya Prabhu to please go ahead with your question.
Sure. Good afternoon, Mr. Birla. Pleasure interacting with you today. Sir, I wanted to ask you, with a group as diversified such as yours, how do you protect yourself against disruption? Someone said to me recently that I'll say in Hindi, कि आजकल रेस में आगे कौन भाग रहा है उससे डर नहीं है, जो अभी रेस शुरू कर रहा है उससे डर है, because there's so much disruption that's happening. So how do you protect a diversified group such as yours with sectors which range from aluminum to cement to telecom, etc., and textile? So how do you protect yourself against disruption, and do you also actively invest in new technologies or new companies which you see could be the I know you're Aditya Birla New Age now, but could be the let's say the business of the future?
Yeah, I think that's a great question. This basically falls in the domain of each of our businesses, but I'd like to think of myself as a chief risk officer, and this is something that keeps me on my toes all the time. I think firstly, it's important for large businesses to recognize that there could be some entrepreneur in some garage anywhere in the country, not just in the metros, who could be creating a very disruptive solution to what we provide to our customers today. And therefore, I think the fact that big is beautiful perhaps is no longer true. You could have someone creating very disruptive innovation that can take you completely off guard. I think that one has to keep thinking from the consumer's point of view. A large amount of disruption that happens on the consumer facing side. And I think constantly thinking through the eyes of the customer, how you could do better, how you can make the customer journey more seamless, less difficult, more enjoyable, is the perspective that you have to use to think of what kind of disruption might happen. We also invest in startups where we believe we could, be party to new technologies that could disrupt the industry in the future. We've also quite aggressively started to invest in research and development, especially in the manufacturing businesses, with the view to stay ahead and at the edge of innovation. I think that's a very important point that you raised, Amir.
Thank you, Mayor. Can I request Mayor Janan to please go next, Mayor?
Hi, Bhaiya. I hope you're doing well.
Yeah, good to see you.
So I wanted to ask you from a young entrepreneur's so on one side, you hear about the unicorns, and the new term that I learned today was a decacorn. And on the other side, you have young entrepreneurs facing a lot of adversity and challenges. So what would your message be to the young people on the other side of the spectrum who are seeing these big unicorns being made at the same time they're facing real challenges on the ground? How do you overcome that? And what your advice to entrepreneurs would be on that front?
I think, like I said earlier, if you're passionate about what you're doing, then you will persist. I don't think that obstacles on the ground, are only in the domain of new entrepreneurs or startups. All of us face them in varying degrees depending on the businesses that we're in. I think that we Indians are pretty resilient, more than people are across the world, and that's through first-hand experience that I say that, and our ability to do jugaad is actually, for Indians, a competitive strength. So I think innovation, I think hanging in there, being persistent, never say die attitude, all of these go a long way in overcoming challenges on the ground.
Yeah, I have a question here. So what is your take on all these new unicorns or these new startups, the kind of valuation they're getting? Sometimes with your old traditional businesses, you're confused, like, is there something wrong you're doing in terms of valuation? So what is your take on that?
It's giving a valuation, so you can't say it's wrong or it's right. But having said that, I definitely don't understand the valuation that the market is giving. I think it's the product of a huge amount of liquidity in the system and being there at the right place at the right time. I think from what I know, some of the unicorns are truly delivering a new customer proposition to existing and new customers, widening the net of people who services and goods can be made available to. I also think that I see some bubbles in some places, but I think the public market is, at the end of the day, I've come to believe the best judge of things like this. But the short answer to your question, Vikash, is that I don't understand these multiples, and let's see how long they last for actually.
Thank you, Bhaiya. With this, may I now request Chandra Bhaiya to please go ahead, Mr. Dhanukar. Bhaiya, you're on mute, Bhaiya.
No, I'm Acha.
Yeah, I'm sorry. Yeah, before I put my question, sir, I would like to salute you and congratulate you for continuously increasing the wealth of our country. And my question will not be regarding business, because your deliberation has been quite intensive, and it has given me the answers pertaining to business. But my question is a personal one. And I'm 67. I wish to work for 25 more years. I feel that is the right thing to do. I would like to know the view of a champion. Because I don't want to be wrong after 25 years that why I didn't retire. You say that this is what I want to work very hard. I am working very hard, really. So I'd like to have your opinion.
So I think Dhanuka, it's very individual thing.
Yeah.
Everyone has a different take on life, what they want to do. I definitely can't work as I do just now, to be honest, till I'm 90. I don't think I'll get to 90 if I keep working this hard. But I think for me to keep productively occupied, whatever space it might be, and I think things just evolve. New doors open, new opportunities come up. And I think for me, it's important to just keep an open mind. I don't see myself working till I'm 90 if I reach that age. But I'd like to be engaged in some business or the other, something that I'm very passionate about.
Thank you. I got your point. Thank you, sir.
Thank you. May I now ask Mr. Sanjay Budia? Sanjay, we have to please go next.
Hello, Kumar. Yeah. What you said, there cannot be better time than now for India to be a superpower, super economic power, and particularly in exports where I'm directly involved. I can't find better time than this because the customers and the countries are looking at us. Earlier, we used to go there, we used to call them. Now it is the other way around. From morning till now, you are flooded with the inquiries. You are flooded. How fast can we do? And particularly this China Plus has really also helped us quite a bit. So I think it's the time now for India, how soon we can catch up and how fast can we catch up. So what would be your some suggestions either from the government side or from industry that how do we just catch it up? That's the question, that how do you just do it?
I think we need to keep working on the whole ease of doing business vector. Whilst we've made a lot of progress, come a long way, but I think if you compare us with most economies across the globe, I think given the complexity of the country, given our federal structure, our situation is quite different. You can't compare it with a lot of other countries across the globe, but it is what it is, it's a given. I think that Gati Shakti, for example, where you have so many ministries who come together to resolve issues concurrently, I think that, for example, is a huge incentive that will go a long way in improving the ease of doing business. I think that is the one thing, especially if you're doing businesses that involve both the central and state governments, for example. I really think Gati Shakti is something that can be the key to the problem that we have on that front.
Thank you.
Mehul, you want to go next? Mr. Mehul Monika?
Sure, thanks. Good afternoon, Mr. Birla.
Hi.
Question I had for you was, in your tenure so far, you've had Hindustan Zinc on one end, and you've had the telecom industry investment on the other end. So what would be your key learnings from those two ends of the spectrum?
So Hindustan Zinc, we actually lost out to very regrettably. And I think we just missed some detail in the due diligence that we did. So learning from that, I have always taken away is that the devil is in the detail. We missed by a whisker. It would have been a great investment to add. That's one of the very few regrets that I have actually. I think the devil is in the detail. We didn't value some inventory that was there in the company. That's about it. So yeah, I think there's no end to the detailing that you can do if it's a smart thing to do. On the other end, you said is which one?
The telecom investment.
We can move to next question here.
No, telecom has been a tough one for us. I think that there have been several factors where we could have done better. It's one of the few sectors in which we have not done well. We were on the bank of bankruptcy more than just about a month ago. But it's a story that's going to play out. I think we're in a much better situation today. Some factors that we didn't do right, which were within our control, several that were outside of the purview of what we could have done. I think every situation, every business comes with its own set of learnings. That's what
absolutely
very interesting.
Thank you so much.
Mr. Sanjay Agarwal, Sanjay Bhaiya, you want to go next? Kanishk? Sanjay Bhaiya, you're on mute here.
You are asking whom?
Sanjay Agarwal, Sanjay Bhaiya.
Uh-huh.
Meanwhile, can I
I
please
think Sanjay
request,
Agarwal is on mute.
request Sanjeev Bhaiya, if you have any question, Bhaiya, we'll be really enlightened.
I have a question for him, and I was just asking him on WhatsApp as to how does he keep looking younger and younger every time I see him? Secret.
I sent him the same message.
I actually
Made
just
such a large, bold move in acquiring an IPL team at a staggering price, and he never seems to be stressed and also looks younger every time I see him. So I'm very envious, and I want to know the secret of that.
Absolutely.
you have a good camera, which makes you deceptively young.
I'm sure everyone on this meet will agree with me.
Yeah, I sent the same message. Reset Kumar has sent the same message. Absolutely. So Sanjeev, you must share the secret now.
I'm telling you, it's a deceptive camera.
Bhaiya doesn't want to share the secret.
As always.
But if I may say, Sanjay Budia, Sanjeev Goenka, and Kumar, all three of them are looking young. So that's very good. So I think all three of you should be sharing your success
Oh God.
at looking young.
Thank you, Rajiv.
May I now request Kanishk Sethia to please go next, please?
Good afternoon, Mr. Birla. It's a pleasure to be.
Yeah.
It's a pleasure to talk to you, sir.
Likewise.
And just adding to your point on Gati Shakti, sir, I would like to say that your companies and we are working very closely on this, sir, for both your Renukoot plant as well as Lapanga, in trying to see how the multimodal work can be made and brought into fruition to reduce the overall cost of logistics, sir. So I think with your vision, sir, I think it's something that will happen sooner than later, and it's a process that will add a lot of value not only to Hindalco Group but to the country as a whole, sir.
I think it's a very forward-thinking move. It's a little late. I remember we were on the Prime Minister's Advisory Council, and very long back, I was privileged to be on the council with RP Dadaji, Sanjeev, and we talked about having a mechanism in place by which the coordination between different ministries could be much smoother. So I think this is an idea whose time has come, it seems now.
Thank you. Mr. Prashant Sharma. Prashant, you want to go next?
Namaskar, Mr. Birla. Great pleasure, and you're an inspiration for all of us. My question is that going forward, next decade or two, what should one focus upon, manufacturing or services, and between the two, which specific sectors or areas? I know it's a very subjective question. It's a very broad one. I'm sorry for that, but just wanted your take on this.
I mean, everyone on the call, I think, would have a take on this. I don't think there's an either or. It depends on which sector you're talking about. I mean, it could be from services, could be from manufacturing. When I see all of this digital stuff happening, the only thing that concerns me is I think we're losing sight of what we call unit economics. एक unit बनाओ तो उसमें पैसा बनता है या नहीं बनता है after you allocate all the costs and cash flows. I mean, can a business really survive unless it makes operating cash flows? So I think there are some basic metrics that remain unchanged, whether it is a service business or a manufacturing business. You can, of course, monetize a part of your stake, get equity, get funds. But at the end of the day, the business has to have strong fundamentals. That's my view on this. We're in both. We are not in digital yet, but we have a presence both in manufacturing and in the basic thematic of strong cash flows of unit economics is germane across all kinds of businesses.
Thanks.
Bhaiya, can we take few more questions?
Yeah, please go ahead.
May I request Mr. Chandan Bansharmani to please go ahead, please, with your question.
Good afternoon, sir. You just mentioned about the tourism that we can achieve this 10 billion tourists coming into India. In spite of having a good infrastructure and then places to visit, like you call it as the beaches or a wildlife or the cultural kind of heritage properties, and a very good connectivity all over the world to India. I want to know from you what is exactly the reason why we're not been achieving this target we've been talking about for the last 10 to 15 years, the same figure which we have been talking about.
Absolutely, I agree with you. I think that we have much more to offer in terms of just sheer, the quality of our traditions, of our heritage, and the sheer diversity of it than most countries that I know. I think that we've obviously not packaged it as well and not created infrastructure that is conducive for tourism. I feel very happy that I believe a lot of us have discovered more of India in the pandemic than we have in a long time.
Right.
Been to hill stations, been to, I don't know how many of you have been to Darjeeling, for example, and after how many years. So many smaller places that have, come back into our consciousness. And I feel that we've kind of rediscovered many places. But I agree with you that tourism is a story that's yet to be told. And I'm sure it can't be that difficult. Connectivity today is much better, let's say the quality of roads, than it's ever been in the past. And I think that's a story that's waiting to unfold.
Thank you.
Thank you. Can I request Mr. Rupak Barua to please go next?
Yeah, hi, good evening, Mr. Birla.
Hi.
I'm from the healthcare industry. So I would like to ask you a question. Actually, we see that your family was quite interested for healthcare as well. And you had made a lot of positive impact in the healthcare sector. And you have your own places, own hospitals, and there's a state-of-the-art hospital that you have created. So my question is, post this pandemic, how do you see the healthcare, and how we can expect you that you will be more active in the healthcare sector? What is your perspective? Thank you.
So all of our hospitals as a family are more in the non-profit space. As far as healthcare is concerned, I think that there's a huge amount of need for healthcare facilities across the country, given the size of the population and the general quality of healthcare, without specifically referring to any one company or any one operation, needs a complete overhaul. I think that what the COVID has done is to bring into play, again, like I was saying earlier, the digital space from a health sector point of view. Several new digital companies, startups that are doing pretty well, I believe. So, for example, telemedicine, I know a couple of digital players who are really making a difference. Elderly care from home, I know is another sector and another part of the vertical of healthcare where there's some, some development that's happening. So I think COVID has again created innovation, especially digital innovation, to address specific sectors within the healthcare space, diagnostics being another one, daycare clinics, being another one. I'm sure you know this better than I do. We don't have any plans in healthcare as of now, but I do think that it is a very interesting space from a digital play point of view. I think there is a real gap, and it can actually meet very real consumer needs.
May I now request Mr. Sanjay Agarwal to please go next? Sanjay Bhaiya.
Good evening, Kumar. It's
Hi.
actually wonderful to really meet you across like this. It has been my dream actually to meet a person like you who came it to at the helm of affairs in such a way. And where have you reached? I just need one question to be answered, that people like me who are making some progress and we need to go professional. But that seems to be a very big challenge with the kind of backgrounds we have come in. The first probably problem is to really let go by ourselves. And then always there are few, family members, 2 or 3 family members very close associated with the business always. And as you and CKD discussed that we self really do not want to be, jobless. So how to go about it actually? Little bit, it's a huge topic actually. I understand it cannot be answered, but whatever you can tell me.
I believe that unless we are as promoters want or are comfortable with bringing in professionals and empowering them, we shouldn't really do that. I think it's not necessary to have professionals. If you have a family-run business which is doing well, it's not necessary to bring in professionals. Especially, I think when you bring in professionals, as you yourself said, you've got to be comfortable with knowing less and less gradually of what's happening in the company. It's a natural progression because you have someone else from outside who's come in, who's doing some of the things that you were doing, which is otherwise he shouldn't be there or she shouldn't be there. So I think the mindset shift has to happen, and there has to be a very specific purpose as to why you want to bring in professionals. Otherwise, it's very difficult to for family and professionals to coexist, is my experience.
Okay. Yeah, that's a good point actually, but we are fighting with that only actually. Thank you, but thank you. It gives me some idea. Yes.
Thank you, Sanjay. Can I next request Mr. Mudit Kumar? We'll keep this as the last 1 or 2 questions. Mr. Mudit Kumar.
Yeah. Thank you. Good afternoon.
Hi.
I was just wondering about, you touched upon research and development for our country and seeing the vision that you have for our country moving forward, and the rightful place in the world if we want to take, then we would need to add a lot of value on the cutting edge, where value add addition takes place with research. And I was wondering whether you think our companies and the environment on the private sector and including our educational policy and the way tenancy works, etc., at education institutes. Do you think we are going along in the right way? Is there something we can do along on the private side? And then, this has to also come along with the public sector. Thank you.
Frankly, I think that's a very good question and very real question. I must say that when I say R&D, it's more the D than the R. It's more the development than basic research.
Sure.
Very few companies, from what I can recall, who've done very deep fundamental research. There has really been a pivot for a change or a change in the trajectory of the company's revenues, profitability. I think what we are more good at clearly is the research part of it. It's a matter of dollars. That we have some companies globally who spend more in R&D than what our revenues are in some cases. Revenues of Indian companies are. So it's a tough one. I think the easier way is to acquire technology. If you are banking on proprietary technology, then I think, if it's basic R&D, I think the challenge is huge. If it's basic research, rather, if it's fundamental basic research, I'm not sure how many, I don't know if anyone else can think of it, but I'm not sure how many Indian companies have been able to do breakthrough basic research. Developmental work, a lot of us. So I see an issue there. I think creating a triangulating government, educational institutions, and the private sector, and creating bridges between the three that today operate as island where research is concerned. government agencies have huge funding available for research. You have students and PhD, even professors in education institutes who do a lot of very high quality research. And then you have corporates who can actually put that research to use in many instances. So I think creating an ecosystem like that with these three major components working together, for example, can be one way out for us as India.
Thank you.
I will keep this as the last question. What challenges you see for India achieving COP26 commitments?
Sorry, achieving?
COP26 commitments.
What is that?
India's COP26 commitments.
COP.
Climate.
Glasgow.
COP, sorry.
What?
Yeah, okay. I just think that it's the cost of compliance which will be a little difficult for us. I don't think that intellectually there's nothing that we can't understand. I think that sometimes the cost of compliance becomes a huge burden, and we have to be able to absorb that cost. And I think that that's going to be something that will require careful study as to how to stagger that out in a way that's acceptable to the regulatory authorities. I think that's the biggest challenge from my perspective.
Thank you, sir, for being our honored guest today and sharing your invaluable sights with us. I'm sure all of us have.
Such forums, I always get the most interesting questions from the ladies, but the only lady on this forum hasn't asked us.
So I am actually wanting to ask you something, if you allow me.
Of course.
So Mr. Good evening, and really, listening to you is a big pleasure for all of us. I wanted to ask you
my
a particular question.
Here which said, ladies and gentlemen, I didn't see any ladies, so I had to cut out the ladies, but it's good.
Oh God. Okay, so I want to ask you, when we build organizations, we do build with all our all our might, all our effort, and we try to do build those organizations. But on the way, when we kind of carry on with those organizations, many a times what happens is there's a lot of influence by the the politics or the atmosphere of the country, and then they get influenced by then the excellence of those organizations don't come up. So what is your thought on that? Can we dissociate the politics from organizations, be it a government or a public or a private organization? Even public organizations do get influenced, and many a times the work culture, the output, the quality, the standards, everything gets hampered. We built so much, and then we can't do that last leg. I think it's very important on the quality of organizations. What's your thought on that, sir?
So of course, government organizations, say a PSU or a PSP, would very directly be impacted by what's happening in the government policy. But I've had no experience of the political environment impacting any of our companies other than in terms of policy, not in terms of culture. I don't think that culture has been something that has been impacted by what's happening, in government.
The staff situations, the sub-staff unions.
Again, I would say that that's more a policy issue and not so much driven by government. And again, it varies from state to state. There are some states where an exit policy can be implemented fairly easily, somewhere it's more difficult to do so, somewhere where you'd rather not get into that at all. So no, I haven't really experienced that, to be honest. Political environment impacting our companies in any kind of cultural way.
Thank you so much.
The kind of Mr. Billa to take questions. Any more questions? If anybody want to come forward, please. Before we conclude the session. Any message from you here, if you want to share, Mr. Billa, if you have anything for all of us, if you want to.
No, I think there's so much of talent just on this call. I mean, I think that we are blessed with huge intellectual capability. I sincerely think that Indian manager leaders are the best anywhere in the world. And I've always said that in our own forums where we have people from 30 different nationalities, because I truly believe in that. that's been my own experience.
Probably I'll keep this as the last question. I'm not sure if I should ask this or not. Like if you have to start from the scratch, which sector you'll get into?
It's a hypothetical question, but I mean, it depends. Starting from scratch today, and I think, either infrastructure, it could even be something digital, but I'm not sure if digital matches our way of thinking. I'm not sure if digital, for example, what's the fate of a retail investor who invests in a listed digital company? That still has to pay out. So I would still put my bet on infrastructure.
Infrastructure. Sanjeev, if you can take your call on this, if you can take your take on it. You want to answer this same question?
I've frankly been a student of what Kumar does. And very quietly, but very definitely.
That always manages to embarrass me in a very sort of unobtrusive.
So, I mean, frankly, जब गुरु बोलता है तो चेला को कुछ नहीं बोलना चाहिए.
Yes, I think it's everyone has their own, horses for the courses. Everyone has a comfort level with certain industries. Like, for example, I think finance is a very, very interesting business to be in. Financing, let's say, small, medium enterprises being a bank is, I think, such a powerful platform that one can, put to such good use. But there's no right or wrong. It's also where one's heart is really.
Thank you, sir.
We know because he just invested, like I said, so hugely in an IPL company, teams, which means he's betting on sport and on cricket.
You want to talk on this here?
What do you want to ask about that?
Anything you want to share?
Sorry, Vikash, I missed that.
Anything you want to share, Bhaiya, on the sports and entertainment industry? Like what?
Very bold move in a very unconventional space, if I can say that. And I think it'll do very well. I know that you're passionate about cricket, Sanjeev Bhaiya, and I think, like I always believe, like I said also earlier today, that passion is where it all has to start. You have great attention to detail, and I think it's a great bet that you made. Audacious, bold, but then what the hell? I mean, you've got to do that sometimes.
Thank you for all your good wishes. I need all the good wishes that I can get.
So, ladies and gentlemen, with this, we'll conclude the session today. Thank you, Mr. Birla, for being our honored guest today and sharing your valuable insights with us. I'm sure all of us have learned a lot, and going forward, we look forward to many more opportunities of interacting with you. Also, sir.
Thank you.
Also, sir, I'm personally grateful to you for your presence today. It really means a lot to me, as I could not ask for a better closing of my year than having your presence, sir. Thanks a lot, and really look forward to meeting you in person soon for new learnings again.
Yeah, thank you.
And with this, may I now request Mr. Pradeep Sureka, our president, to present the vote of thanks, our incoming and the new president now. Mr. Sureka, over to you.
Thank you, Vikas. Good evening, Mr. Birla. On behalf of ICC, I would like to express my sincere thanks and gratitude to you for finding time in your busy schedule. Your family, of course, everybody knows, is probably the founder of this chamber. And since then, the Birla name has been synonymous with the development and growth of the Indian economy. Under you, your leadership, this legacy continues to flourish, and the group is in the forefront of realizing the vision of 5 trillion economy. The insights, the positivity, the optimism about India will go a long way, which you have shared with us. And I'm sure all our members will go back thinking, dreaming big, and will play their own part in turning this country into a global economy and a leader economy in the world. Thank you so much again.
Thank you. It's been my pleasure, really.
Thank you very so much.
Thanks, everyone. Thank you.